I'm already super scandalous, so. Drinking alcohol. I kissed a boy once.
When are you going to kiss a girl?
What did you just say?
I said, when are you going to kiss a girl?
Wow. That's not all this scandalous.
Let's just go there.
Question number 1.
When do you plan on kissing a girl?
Oh my god!
How much have you had? How long has this interview been going on? So I'm here in Dallas. What part of Dallas is this?
Bishop Arts.
Bishop Arts.
Mm-hmm. The best.
It's really
part.
cool. They have like different the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
But they're not like subdivisions, but there's no separation.
No.
Yeah.
No.
That's weird.
Not official.
Yeah.
At all. But like if you tell people like which part, and then I think there's a little rivalry, but because I love this part of town, so I think it's the best part.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm here in Dallas with our friend Krista. We came into town so they all can go see Brandy Carlisle last night. So taking advantage, especially advantage of this awesome rainy day. So I'm having, what am I having? Breckenridge bourbon whiskey. What are you having?
A mimosa.
Mimosa.
Here
with
some Andre champagne and tangerine juice instead of orange juice.
It's so good. We had it with our brunch. We started early. So I usually like to ask people to introduce themselves, like name, we already have that, but where you're from, what your family looks like, if you want to throw in education, that's cool, but who are you?
Yeah, I am Krista Fultz, like you said. I was born in California and then moved to Ohio, so Southern Ohio, Northern Indiana, and lived most of my middle school, high school, college in Indiana. And then that's when I got connected with the Pines, which is a camp down here in Texas. That was the first time I'd ever been to Texas. My mom actually was very upset. She hated Texas most of my life. She's from Colorado and was like, Texans come to Colorado and they
And that's what you're gonna say.
They come and they act like they own the slopes, and she hated Texans. And so she gave me two she's like, if you come back with a Texas accent, I will. Yeah. And then she was like, if you fall in love with a Texan boy, I will disown you. And now she's like, please fall in love with a Texan and never leave. They live in Oklahoma, and she's like, please stay there.
It's so true. I remember the first time I went snowboarding with a friend's church, and all I saw was UT, A&M, Texas Tech, everywhere. Yeah,
she really hated them for years, and then I thought all Coloradans hated Texans, and it's kind of just her and a couple other people. Most everyone else is yeah, whatever.
Yeah, tourists.
Which has been fun.
Bring in the money,
right? So I'd come here. I worked at the camper in the summer, a couple years, and then I moved to Buffalo. What did I do? I did missionary year out at the camp, and then I moved to Buffalo, New York for 2 years, and then I came back to Texas and was in East Texas, and now I'm in Dallas, and now I just moved from neighborhood to neighborhood.
Is that when we met, when you were doing that was intern and mission year?
I don't think so. Oh, no, I was still doing development, so I was still doing fundraising for them at the time, yeah, because I started at my current job September of 2017.
Okay.
September 5th, not that I remember and have it on my calendar. Not like it's a big deal.
Yeah. So what are you doing now? What's your job now?
Yeah, so I'm the Director of Advocacy and Education at a domestic violence shelter here in Dallas. So I work with women and children who've been affected by domestic violence. Because it's a nonprofit work, you wear multiple hats. So I talk about how I have 4 buckets that I'm over, 4 hats that I wear, if you will. So I oversee our front office staff. So when a woman calls, or maybe a family member or a doctor or a community member calls and wants information about I have a patient or a family member who is affected by domestic violence, or I'm affected by domestic violence, what do I do? Where do I go? What can I do? My front office staff, along with a hotline, takes those calls. So I supervise that, do a lot of training with them. And I also oversee our advocates. So if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs is like the best way I describe it. So we have therapists who do the emotional support work, and then my advocates do the like physiological and safety needs of clients. And so maybe it's help navigating the legal system, or help finding housing, or getting diapers or food, anything. I very loosely use the word physical. And we do a lot of safety planning about staying at the home until she's able to leave, or talking to her about staying in that home and maybe that's the safest option for her, or leaving and what that'll look like and how to do that safely. Or if she's left, how to stay safe in that. So a lot of safety in there. 1, 2, third bucket, I do a lot of community like partnering. So I sit in a lot of courtrooms and do kind of court accompaniment and meet a lot of different resources so that I can bridge those gaps. So if my client needs help with getting a GED, I have developed relationships with organizations that'll pay for her to get her GED. Or be able to connect her with them. Or if she, maybe she has been to prison before and has a felony, so she needs to be connected with an organization that can help her find jobs there. So I do a lot of community work in creating those bridges and those resources. And then being on like community teams where we collaborate about victims of domestic violence and can work together. And then my fourth bucket is the community education piece. So I oversee kind of all the speaking engagement requests that come to our office, and then I do quite a bit of them, and then I spread them out to the rest of our staff. So we do like a domestic violence 101, teen dating violence, trauma in the brain, kind of anything really domestic violence related we'll do. So obviously I'm really bored in my job and I need more to do.
I want to fill my time.
I know. This is why I drink mimosas on Saturday morning.
It says gin, but it's not.
I know. It's
Sometimes.
very deceiving.
But this isn't really your first job in this area.
Yeah.
When you were in Buffalo, what were you doing?
Yeah, so for the first year I lived in Buffalo, I did kind of an internship with Catholic Charities, and I worked for their victim services, and that's really where I was trained really well in the dynamics of domestic violence and how to work with victims. My supervisor there was phenomenal and sent me to every training she could. I really appreciate her for that. So I did that for a year. I helped work on a grant as well. So we got HUD funds to be able to pay for housing. So if a woman was fleeing and she needed to get her own place, we could pay for some of her rent for going forward, which is a huge thing that like is never an option. Like we never have those funds. And so that was really cool for my first year to be able to help with that. And then after that, I did court accompaniment. So I was a full-time court advocate. So I'd get domestic incident reports from the police, follow up with victims, go to court with them, do safety planning with them, help in those meetings, like with her and the prosecutors, kind of be able to kind of prepare her what they're going to say. So not like prep her, because that's illegal. I can't. I'm not a lawyer. I can't do. One of the two most common things I say, I feel like, are I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a doctor. Like I cannot diagnose and I cannot give you legal advice. I think I say that probably 50 times a day. We kind of get her ready, because it's if you think about going to court or even going to the doctor, if you don't know what to expect or what it is, it's really scary.
What questions to ask?
What questions to ask, or even going into the building. Where do I go in the building when I get there? What's going to happen? And when I go to court, I get anxious because it's the one here in Dallas is 10 floors, 11 floors high. It's this big brick building. There are police officers everywhere. It's just very overwhelming, and it's kind of like a gross place. Yeah, and it's kind of a gross, dirty place too. So I get intimidated, and I'm just going on behalf of somebody. It's not my life that's being affected. So that's what I did when I did full-time court advocacy. I would go to court with her so that she had a supportive person. Because what we know a lot about domestic violence is the isolation piece, that she's been isolated from friends or family or community supports. And if you think about it too, if I'm going maybe to criminal court to testify about maybe a sexual assault or a physical assault that happened, maybe I don't want my mom to be there too and hear about the details of this. So maybe having a third party person who's non-judgmental, who's coming to support me and knows a little bit about where to go in the courthouse, and if abuser comes by, I can talk to the bailiff, and I can I tell you what your rights are. We can talk to the bailiff. Do you want someone to walk you out to your car? Because I'm not a bodyguard. I'm not going to walk her out to her out to her car. I'm not going to be any good. So let's get the bailiff to come walk you out to your car. Or are you hungry? We can go get some food. This is where like the cafeteria is, and so we can walk her through that. So that's what I did there. And then I also did. We lost a grant, so I was the last one hired in Buffalo. I'm all over the place. All of these jobs come together, but we lost a grant there, so I transitioned into a children's counselor role. So I was in the shelter for about a year, and I would work with moms and their kids who were in shelter. So help them get into school if they needed to transfer schools. So did a lot of parenting stuff, talked a lot about safe sleep and connecting them with resources in the community, diapers, uniforms, whatever they needed for school. So I did that for about a year too. So this is my third kind of position in a DV shelter.
Yeah.
And I love it.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk to you because, like, one, I love your heart and you're just like passionate for people and all that. And I'm just like, well, duh, she should be doing this. But like, what got you into this? Because this isn't like just a walk-in, light and fluffy type of job. Let me just do this and I'll feel good about myself. But like, this looks heavy stuff you're dealing with, like real lives.
It is. I kind of weirdly stumbled into it. So in school, my degree is in theology, but I started off as a physician assistant major, and like, spoiler, like I'm really bad at science. Like science and math, I don't know why I ever got into that. But I was in that for a while. For a year and a half, hated it, so I switched. And when I switched, there was a class that I was really interested in taking called comparative genocide. And up until that point, I'd lived, my family was fairly healthy. I'd never been around violence or I was never assaulted, very thankfully, of that. So I was very kind of ignorant and naive in like a good way. Like it was good that I hadn't had those personal experiences. So went into this class, this comparative genocide class, and we studied genocides from the 20th century, from Armenia to Darfur. That was still happening when I was in school. And so we studied those genocides and the violence and what happened, and then like the psychology behind that. And it totally opened up my mind and heart to like this area that I just was not aware of that was going on, and this violence that people were experiencing, and that I came from a fairly privileged background and was not exposed to any of these, even these conversations. And so that opened my eyes and my heart, and so I started taking social work classes after that, and was really drawn to kind of the domestic violence work.
Because
I don't know. I mean, one part is it's really interesting there, but it's not, I always try to check myself that it's not like, when you drive down the highway and there's an accident and everybody's watching the accident, where like they're kind of entertained and they want to see like, is there blood and guts kind of thing, where it's not kind of that piece, but I'm interested in it, but I can also listen and hear those stories, and I'm not entertained by them. Like that would be like a sociopath. I don't think like that would be really bad. Right? Like what else happened? No, definitely not that. But then I can also sit across from somebody and I can hear these stories, and I can read police reports of some of the worst days in people's lives, and I'm able to sit and be empathetic. And I was telling Erica earlier, and I think you as well, that sometimes I joke that like something is broken in me, that I can sit and I can listen to these and I'm not affected and I can go home. I was actually at a case study this week at this conference that we were at, and there are horrible pictures up on the screen and they're playing 911 calls, and I'm like eating my burrito, and I was like, something is wrong.
Am I okay? Is this normal?
I know. I was like, I'm hungry. Like I need to eat. Like I want to eat this, and I was like, I feel like I shouldn't, but I'm really hungry.
Was anyone looking at you weird? Like, what is she doing?
I was like, I'm not gonna look at anybody. I'm not gonna look at anyone in the eye. I'm like, I'm just gonna eat this burrito. So, but Eric was very loving and said that it's a gift too, and I really do think that it's a gift that I'm able to sit and listen, and I'm very lucky that I was able to stumble in it in a very kind of innocent way, that I hadn't been personally affected, but I found kind of my passion and am able to sit there and listen and be empathetic, and then go home and be normal or eat a burrito.
But I'm assuming it's not like it 100% like doesn't affect you. Like I was mentioning earlier how I met a guy at who was a former EMT for 10 years, and he was just sharing how like, yeah, he's like, EMTs, surgeons, doctors, nurses, like they're all messed up in some way. Like they're all on meds, or they have counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, all this stuff. And then like I have a friend who has been a lawyer for I guess like 2 years or whatever. And I think he was fine, but I think he realized, because he deals with a lot of car wrecks. He's like, and he just realized, you know what? People shouldn't be seeing decapitated bodies. So like, let me just make sure I'm covered and healthy and okay. Yeah. So he goes regularly now. Yeah. But like, what kind of I don't know, what kind of like self-care do you need? Yeah, definitely. So I am really thankful. I have some really amazing coworkers who I'm able to talk to. I say now that I'm therapist adjacent, so I work with a lot. I'm not a therapist, but I work with a lot of therapists, and my like best friends at work are therapists. So sometimes I'll joke to them and be like, I need a crisis session after this meeting, or something was said, and like I need to talk it out. So I can talk with them. At work, so I have really good supportive people. I can talk to my supervisor too if I'm feeling really overwhelmed, or I've got some really heavy client loads or something that's going on. I can talk internally to my coworkers and directors at work. And then I also do a lot of not self-analyzing, but I think about myself, like, how am I feeling? Am I feeling really down too? So I try to be really cognizant of how like my body is feeling. Am I feeling depressed? Am I like going home from work and like sleeping all day? Like that's something I'd be aware of. And then I also, I think everyone needs a therapist. Like everyone on the planet needs a therapist. So I have a therapist. I used to have a therapist, and then I switched insurances, and so I found a new one. I really loved my old therapist. Got a new therapist. Didn't really jive with her, so I'm looking for a new one right now to see, but that's also really huge, because what we realized too is that even though I don't have a personal background in this, I'm going to have different triggers, and things are going to come up at different times too. So things that I had thought I'd processed through with my old therapist is now different with this job, and when things come up, and so recognizing those and things that like really make me angry, or potentially make me really depressed or sad, being aware of those and then being able to process through those. So therapy is also really huge. And then like making sure I'm doing fun things for myself too. So especially in this neighborhood, I love to walk. So I walk the dog around the neighborhood, and that's really helpful for me. Just having like a physical outlet is really great. And then like having like a little dog to like big dog to run around with, like that's really nice. And then hanging out with friends and making sure I'm going out to maybe a happy hour, or I'm going to a show or something that is like life-giving as well. So making sure that, because it's very easy for me, especially like in a director role, I could work easily 80 hours a week, but that's not healthy. So setting that boundary and then making sure I'm doing something. I'm very extroverted, so I need something to do. Going to see people, going out to do stuff. And so I'm very cognizant of that. And I realize that there are times that I'm not very good at it, and I'm like, I haven't gone anywhere or done anything in the last like few weeks. Like I need to change that. And so, as director, do you have to kind of like not hover, but like take care of like your employees, like people around you, making sure like they're taking care of themselves? And, definitely. We're really aware of that. One, because this work is so heavy, so I care about them personally and how it's affecting them, but also if they're burnout, that can be really dangerous to our clients. And so, especially with victims of domestic violence or victims of trauma, they're very, very sensitive to what we say, to how they interact in the world, because they've had to do that to stay safe. So that idea of walking on eggshells, she's had to walk on eggshells around that abusive person to stay alive, really, to stay safe, to keep her kids safe, to keep the community at large safe. She has to be very sensitive, and it's very natural that doesn't stay just with her relationship with the abuser, but with the whole world. So when she comes to us, she's also very sensitive to our interactions with her. And if you think about it too, there's such a huge stigma about being a victim of domestic violence. Nobody wants to be a victim, wants to be hurt, be abused. And so admitting that to us is huge. And so part of her too, a lot of the women who come in is looking for any excuse not to come in. It's not that bad. It's not actually domestic violence. Like, I'm just being crazy. I'm being sensitive to that. And so
when she calls us or comes in, if we are maybe rude or I'm having an off day, and maybe I'm sick and I'm just kind of like, hi, kind of thing. You're like, how are you? Or like I just got off the phone with maybe an abuser called, or maybe like I had an aggravating phone call, and like so I'm frustrated, and I bring that into the next call that she's calling in on, and I sound like, thank you for calling, and she's like, oh no, like they're mean, I'm done, I'm hanging up the phone. And so the idea, we call it being trauma informed, is kind of the term that's used across the field, and really through like police departments and stuff too, and being trauma informed, and realizing that she's experienced a trauma and she's very sensitive to that. And so going back to the like being burnt out, if I'm burnt out or jaded and I don't really care how my tone is, and I answer the phone really gruffly, there she goes, she's not going to call back. She might never call back. And with that escalate, she very literally could die. Like she could be killed by the abuser.
Just because of your tone of voice.
I mean, it's kind of a stretch, but yes.
Well,
it is in this field. So we have to be very aware of how we interact with somebody. If I give somebody the wrong numbers or feels judged by me, she may never come back. And so, one, I'm checking in on my staff to make sure they're not burnt out, that they're not jaded, that they're able to have these conversations. And then two, if we make an error or do something wrong, which is very human, I've done things that are wrong for clients, and I have to be very careful on how I to fix that really quickly, because we literally deal with life or death stuff. So if I give her the wrong information, or I call and I leave a voicemail when I wasn't supposed to, she could be in trouble. She could get hurt or get killed, be killed by the abusive person. And so we have to be very, very careful. And so I have to be very quick to talk to our staff about that, because it's literally life and death. So it's that making sure that we're being best practices, that we're growing, and then also making sure we're not jaded too is really huge. Yeah,
because yesterday you were mentioning like the importance of just the secretary or whoever, just like, even if you have a bad phone call and you're pissed off or whatever, like you need to like start over, and like the very next call has to be hello, like like
take a breath, whatever you need to do, because there are three. I've covered the phones, and I'm on the phone with somebody, there's somebody in the window, there's somebody else on the other line that's calling in, and I'm like, and
the
so
UPS guy at the door, and
UPS guy who's bringing donations or bringing like paper, and there's another client who's at the window, and we have a walk in and all this stuff. And so I'm feeling overwhelmed and juggled. But if I put that through, if that comes out through my tone of voice, she might never call back. And there's a story, I always think about this, and I always not threaten my staff with this, but when I train anybody who answers the phone at our office, Leslie Morgensteiner is an author. She wrote a book called Crazy Love, and she talks about her first marriage was really abusive, and she called one domestic violence hotline one time. Nobody answered the phone. She left a voicemail. Nobody called her back, and she never called back again. And thank the Lord, she's fine. Like she's okay now. She was able to like find safety, and she's remarried and is doing well. But I think every time like I don't answer the phone, or someone hangs up on me, or we're disconnected, I just never know. And part of me, I have to set really good boundaries with myself, that like I'm not God, I'm not Jesus, I'm not here to fix somebody, and I can't. There are limits to what I'm able to do ethically, morally. Because there's sometimes I'm like, just live with me, I'll take care of you, and that's not healthy. Like I can't do that kind of thing. So I have to set realistic like boundaries and expectations with clients, and with myself too, that like my job is not to fix somebody, but it's to help them and empower them. Oh, that's the second time. I'm done.
So what? Yeah, like.
Oh man.
Yeah. No. More.
I spilled some, so I need to get some more.
So what kind of calls do y'all get? I know it's what kind of situations do y'all deal with?
Yeah. So it's really, between our hotline and my office, we have a shelter, and then we have like an outreach office, so it's more public. And at the outreach office, we get a lot of calls. They could be like somebody from the community that has a question, or maybe a neighbor who's like heard things through the door or through the window or the walls, or a family member who calls and just doesn't know what to do, or she's calling and she's had to flee and wants to know where she can go. Where's a safe place for me to sleep tonight? Or I want counseling, or I need legal help. I've got kids and I need a divorce and custody stuff. So really anything. Like, we get all types of calls, and sometimes abusers call because they're looking for, she's left and they don't know where. I keep saying she for a victim and he for abuser, and I'm not saying that men can't be abused too. I just want to make that clear.
I was going to ask that. Do you get that? Have you ever received
we
that?
We do.
I'm assuming that's the minority, but
it is. So the numbers show that 85 to 90% of victims of domestic violence are female. And so in my organization specifically just works with women who are victims of domestic violence. And it's not, again, because we don't believe that men are abused, but that the numbers are so great, so much greater for women. And then we decided that we were going to just be experts in one field. We were just going to work with women and children because it's a very different dynamic when man is abused. We do get calls from men who are abused, and we refer out. There's a couple other agencies in the area that work with men, and so we refer out to them, and there's actually a men's shelter in Dallas too, so we'll refer them out just because we do. And that's in like familial violence too, so if maybe a child is abusing a parent, we don't, that's a very different dynamic too. So sometimes like the term domestic violence is like a big umbrella. So we work specifically with intimate partner violence. So there's like a relationship. So maybe they're married or dating. And then there's more of a familial violence. So it could be a grandma abusing a child, or a child abusing an uncle, or something in there. So that kind of falls under the other, like other parts of the umbrella. And that's a very different dynamic. It's hard enough for someone to call the police on like the love of their life. From like a child, so like a mom calling the police on a child, like on her own flesh and blood, is a whole different dynamic than I am not educated and I'm not trained in using that, and not that I'm thankful that I don't. That's a whole different bag of worms that I'm glad that I don't do. But that's out there.
So I think what's cool about talking to people in your field is that you get to see stuff that everyone else on the outside has the luxury of forming their own opinion about. So like, why doesn't she just leave or drop him or whatever? So like, what? I'm sure you can go on forever about this. Like, what is it about?
Days. How long do you have?
What is it about? Like, why? What makes it so hard for? And I know that I'm sure the answer is like, well, it depends on the individual. But like, what makes it so hard for someone to pull out, to leave, to get away?
I'm gonna do it two different ways. First, I want to answer. I think one of the hardest things about domestic violence, and everyone says, why doesn't she just leave? And it's very confusing, and like nobody really wants to talk about it. So the numbers are that 1 in 4 in the United States will be affected by domestic violence, and in Texas it's 1 in 3. So like the numbers are higher here. I don't know why. It's 1 in 3 worldwide, 1 in 3 in Texas. So I don't know. Texas is the world? I don't know. Something along those lines. So it's such a common thing. We just don't talk about it. So October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and it's also Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And so my mom's a breast cancer survivor, so we kind of fight over, like, she wears pink and I wear purple for domestic violence kind of thing. And I'm like, you guys always get more attention than we do. Like, all the football players wear pink, and like 5 Hour Energy is pink, and everything is pink. And I thought about it a lot, and I think kind of the big difference is like with cancer, like nobody is like, I'm on team cancer. Like, I love cancer. Like, don't talk about cancer that way. Like, no one says that. Everyone can rally behind, like, we hate cancer. We want to eradicate cancer. We care for people who have been affected by cancer and their loved ones, kind of thing. But when you think about domestic violence, like, the bad guy in domestic violence is a brother or a husband or a community member or a friend. So I have relationships with this person. I might go to their church, or I work with them at the office, or they're my neighbor, or it's my husband. And so it's very complicated there. And really that dynamic is so different. In that, which makes it hard on the front. And then it's very easy to say, like, just leave and it's going to be better. But statistics also tell us that the most dangerous time for a woman in a domestic violence situation is when she leaves. That 70% of domestic violence homicides happen after she has left the relationship. That first year especially is the most dangerous time. The abuser is losing power and control and generally will escalate at that time. And so her leaving is dangerous. One, the fear of being killed by him, or him hurting her family or friends is really huge at that time. And then there's also the dynamics of domestic violence, that there's power and control. One of the biggest kind of red flags in domestic violence is isolation. And one of the best tactics, if you will, is abuser isolating her from her friends and family and support system. So if she wants to leave, she doesn't have friends or family to go to because he's cut her off. Maybe they've moved across the country. Maybe they've moved from Mexico here and she can't speak the language and she doesn't have friends or family here. Or if you think about if she's from Pakistan or Russia, like at least we have a decent amount of Spanish speakers here. But if I spoke Russian and wanted to say, my husband is hurting me, help me, I'd have no idea. I don't know how to. I wouldn't know how to say that, or work with somebody if she said that to me. So there's that could potentially be isolation, physical isolation from friends or family, or maybe they live in the same area and he's isolated her from them. He's damaged those relationships with friends and family, so they don't support her. They won't have her come in, or they're not going to take her in, or. We talk about like the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of idea. So he looks really loving and caring, and that's the way he's able to get away with his abusive behavior. So maybe her family loves him, and they're like, no, he could never do that. Yeah. So they don't take her in because of that. They just said, go home and be, a better wife, kind of idea. We also see that statistics say that 99.5% of victims of domestic violence will experience financial abuse. And so if you think about if I'm a mom with 3 kids and I want to leave my abusive husband, but maybe he hasn't let me work, or he's opened a lot of credit cards in my name, and so I've got crippling debt. Or I haven't, I've been bringing money home, but I don't have access to that money. Or he's been spending all that money. So I want to leave, and so I've got 3 kiddos, so I need at least a 2 to 3 bedroom apartment somewhere. So if you think about the security deposit for an apartment and first month's rent, and then food, clothing, paying for the kids' school, gas to get to work, paying for the car insurance,
or public transportation.
Any of these, it's overwhelming. And so how is she going to pay for that? And so we see kind of the average is that she'll return 7 times, and it's because she's been so isolated financially from friends or family. And we see too a lot of times is a shift in behavior. So he doesn't have direct access to her. And so he shifts his behavior to use maybe the court system against her. Maybe he keeps dragging her back to court every 6 months, and she has to appear. So he's bringing her to court. He's stalking her through her phone, through her friends. He's spreading rumors. We see things like revenge porn. Maybe he's like sending nude photos of her to her employer or to her friends and family, and like that's cutting off those things. So he's just continuing to harass her. So sometimes it's easier just to go back so he'll stop. Because abusers spend so much energy in abusing people. Like if they did anything else, if they used that energy and funneled it into anything else, world hunger would be solved. Like we could solve so many issues. Like the amount, I sit across from clients all the time, and I'm like, that's exhausting.
A lot of work.
So much. Like why? Like why is he doing that? Or like how does he have the energy and time to do that? And so sometimes it's just easier to stay. Because they put so much energy into that. And so we see, like, it's not just easy to go and to leave.
Erica's waving.
Oh, yeah.
What?
Well, you could finish.
Oh, I was done.
I wanted to ask about if you have stories of women who have left.
Yeah.
What does it look like when a woman successfully leaves? Is that such a minority of the people, but is it doable? Do they do it?
That's a good question. So Erica just asked, does everyone know who Erica is? Do your people know?
Who knows?
Do they know?
No one's watching.
This
so
disembodied voice.
Sure, I know.
my wife is chilling out over here watching. I told her she could chime in whenever she
Hopefully
wanted.
not finding out who I am.
I love it.
You'll be on this side of the camera soon.
Ooh, fine. I love that.
You're running out of bourbon.
You can fix that.
right. Erica's question was, what does it look like when if or when she successfully leaves? And do I have stories of those? Not really. Like, I don't have a ton of stories where like she's left and he's like, meh, I'm gonna move on. A lot of times, I had clients who like abuser has been harassing her for years. They've been separated for years, and you're like, why? He's got a new wife and a new life, but it's this idea. Abusers, the reason they do what they do is there's a sense of entitlement and a feeling of I have the right to what I want, when I want, how I want it, and I have the right to do whatever I need to get that. And so this person has the audacity to leave me. I'm going to punish them for leaving me.
Isn't that what a sociopath is, technically?
Oh, that's
Kind of,
complicated.
yeah. A lot of,
It's another.
yeah. It is. Next time.
The part about being able to justify what you do is definitely part of a lot of OPAFs.
Yeah.
OPAFs, sociopaths,
Yeah.
narcissists, like it's all.
Yeah, it's a myth that's out there that abusers are sociopaths, narcissists, psychopaths.
That's
They
very
might
specific.
have that. Yeah, they
Yeah.
might have that. But if you think about it, it's not an excuse to be abusive.
Yeah.
There are so many people I've heard, oh, he has PTSD, that's why. Most of my clients have PTSD, but they're not abusing their partner. Kind of thing. It's not an excuse. Pete Davidson had something on SNL. He had made this statement that that his mom, his therapist, and his mailman have told him that just because he has a mental health diagnosis, it's not a reason to be a jerk. Kind of idea. And that's that piece too. That there might be a potential mental health diagnosis for the abuser, but that's not an excuse to be abusive, or that all sociopaths are abusive. And it's easier, and I think a lot of people, it's easier to think, oh, they're just a sociopath, like that's why they do that. But that's not what it is. Like, that's not the reason. Unfortunately, it's a lot more complicated, and it would be much easier. I wish I could just say like, oh, it's this mental health, and if we can get this under control, then they won't be abusive anymore.
Because you have a cut and clear diagnosis.
Yeah, but it's not. It's unfortunately not as simple as that. Domestic violence, we talk about it as, for an abuser and a victim or a survivor, it's an equal opportunity epidemic. So I wish I could walk down the street and be like, that man's an abuser and this person is a victim. Like, I could pick him out on the street, but it knows no socioeconomic background, no ethnicity or race, no age. In Texas, the Texas Council on Family Violence, they put out this called the Honoring Texas Victims every year. So they report on the year prior how many people have been murdered by their partners in an intimate partner violence kind of relationship. And generally, like, the youngest victim is like 14, 15, and the oldest are in their 80s or 90s. Like, it stretches our whole lives, unfortunately. In that, we know that younger women, 15 to 24 are at the highest risk of domestic violence, but it doesn't just go away as we get into our like late 20s and 30s. It can go up through like 80s and 90s. I don't know if I answered your question on that. I don't think I did, but it's fine.
I mean, is that range, the 14 to 24, because that just reminds me of, well, the brain is technically done developing at 25, so like maybe they're easier to manipulate or abuse or whatever.
Yeah.
It just reminded me, that's why I thought I'd ask.
That's a huge piece. What we see, like, especially with teen dating violence, is that for, I do not ever remember being in like high school or middle school, like, and if they did come in, I don't remember it. But somebody coming in and talking about what a healthy relationship is or what a healthy relationship isn't. And so we're just kind of like guessing and trying to think about, like, I don't know, this seems right, or like this feels good, maybe this is right. And so I would say a lot of it, like, we're learning from movies and films and stuff.
Or friends.
I think about a little off topic. The movie Twilight, like, Edward is hella abusive. And then, like, he is super jealous. He actually pulls like the battery out of her car so that Bella, like the girl, can't get to the werewolf. Like he stops her from going anywhere, and he's like, I just love you so much, that's why it is. And like people are like, oh, that's so romantic. Or the new show on Netflix, You. If you see, I refuse to watch it right now for my own self-care. But it's all about this stalker who is stalking this woman and then like gets into a relationship with her. And like the actor like came out and said, I think on Twitter, like, no, I'm the bad guy. Like, I'm not. This isn't romance. Like, this is not okay. Like, stalking is not okay.
There shouldn't be a team behind me. Team Edward and team whatever.
Yes.
I don't need a team.
Team whatever that guy's name is from you. Like, that's not. But we glamorize like jealousy. Nick Jonas has a song called Jealous, and he says like, I have the right to be hellish when I get jealous. Like, it's glamorized in our music, in
50
our
Shades.
Yeah. Oh yeah. In all these pieces. So like, if nobody is telling me what's healthy, I'm learning it from media. I'm learning it from the internet. I'm learning it from my friends, and like they don't know what they're doing either, and because they're also 14. You know, like we don't know what we're doing. We're just trying to guess.
Yeah.
And so we see, especially like that 15 range, the teen dating violence years, is that. I think I got my numbers mixed up. 15 to 24 is the highest risk of physical assault, I think, and 15 to 44, I can't remember. We'll give you notes later. I'll look at my numbers. I should know these. My brain is fried today. But
we were up pretty late.
we were. But we see like with the teens, is that it's the first time they're in a relationship, so they don't really know. We don't know what's healthy, what's not healthy. And
when
then,
that happens,
yeah,
the first one.
If there's a teen dating violence relationship, if this is my first relationship and I don't know, like this is not okay, and I've never been taught that this isn't okay, you also think of like that rush of hormones that like, I don't know if you remember me, like 15, and like I felt everything so like acutely, like I know what love is. Like I'm 15 and I've experienced everything. Like I know what love is. I know what this is. And it's that piece of like, I don't know what to do with my feelings and my emotions. And so everything is felt so much deeply.
There's almost no time to think about it. Like, is this okay? Like, should this be happening?
It's not the forte of a 15-year-old.
Yeah, and they can't, because their brains aren't developed, they can't think long term. Like, you're not supposed to think that. It's that can't and won't. Like, they cannot think long term. They cannot think, like, I go in and talk about, like, longevity on the internet. You know, if you put out photos, like, on the internet, like, they're never going to go away. Like, those will always be there, or statements you make. And their brains aren't formed enough to make those long term. Like, they're not supposed to yet. And so they're not going to make those, they can't do that. And so it can make it more dangerous and just confusing, and they don't know. And the boys too, like abusers as well, like they don't know that this isn't okay. I'm not giving an excuse, I'm not justifying abusive behavior ever in that, but there is also that piece, like they don't know that they're not supposed to be doing this, that I'm not supposed to intimidate my girlfriend, or I'm not supposed to be doing this, which in movies, films,
is it always necessarily a cycle? Like, well, if his dad did it, he's gonna do it. Is it necessarily that?
Not necessarily. There are definitely that could be happening, but it's not. That's not always. I've had clients who are like, you know, my parents had a healthy relationship. Like, I couldn't believe that I was in this, and so sometimes it's like, you've never seen an unhealthy relationship, so it's kind of like, oh, what's happening? We see too. An escalation. So at the beginning, I've worked with a lot of like batterers programs who work with the abusers, and I've heard facilitators say, like, I've heard men say, like abusive men say, I wouldn't hit her on a first date, and you're like, well, then why is it ever okay to hit her? But they know, like, if I hit her on the first date, she wouldn't go out with me again. So that behavior at the beginning, I want to say that I believe it's subconscious. Don't think most like abusive people are like, okay, I won't hit her today, but like in 6 months I'm going to, kind of thing. Like, it's not like a mapped out piece.
Map
like,
it out. So today,
okay, so this day I'm going to do this, and this day I'm going to call her like a fat pig on this day, and then I'm going to do like it's not calculated like that, but it's a subconscious, that entitlement that I can say these things through that, but it's over time. And so what we see a lot of times at the beginning of relationships, like one of the biggest red flags is like an intense, like, love bombing kind of thing that, like, people move really quick. They, like, get engaged really fast. They move in together really fast. They say I love you, like, within days. And, like, it feels good. Like, if you think of, like, the beginning of a relationship where, like, there's these, like, butterfly feelings and, like, I want to spend time with this person.
And those types of things lock you in.
Yeah.
Like, I love you. Oh, okay.
Done. Like,
I love move in. Well, now you've got bills and all that stuff.
And so, like, it's that
leave.
piece, that's that escalation, that idea of watching a frog boil, or not watching a frog boil. Like, if you want to boil a frog, if you throw a frog in a pot of boiling water, it's going to jump out. But if you slowly turn up the heat, it doesn't realize that it's boiling itself alive. So it's that escalation, and a lot of times we aren't aware of what those red flags are, or we don't see them because we're, like, blinded by love, which makes sense. And so that escalation. So, and again, it's not generally. It doesn't escalate to, like, physical violence very, like, right away. Sometimes it does, and those are really scary when it's, like, a short amount of time, but it escalates over time. And it'll escalate to when the abusive person feels like they've got somebody locked in. So after, like, we've moved in together. Leslie Morgensteiner, again, the woman I referenced earlier, she talks about the first time she was physically assaulted by her first husband was the night before their wedding. So, and in that, if you think about it, they've been together for a while, and they have put thousands of dollars into this wedding. All their friends or family are there. They're really stressed, and I can definitely see how, I wouldn't call off the wedding the night before. It would be so embarrassing. Like, so embarrassing to say, like, you know, my fiance hit me last night. Like, we're calling off the wedding. Like, how would you do that? Are you going to call all, 200, 300 people who are coming to your wedding and like, tell them, okay, sorry, the wedding's off. I know you flew across the country to, like, come here. Like, how mortifying and embarrassing. And, like, and on a subconscious, he knew that. Like, he knew he had her. And he was able to escalate in that. And so it takes over. And so it's so confusing. In there too. And we also talk about, I've totally gone off your question. I have no idea where
Keep talking. Keep talking.
Okay, good. Can you tell my community education piece, the fourth bucket that I do? I'm like, I can talk about this for days and days and days. But we also talk about my last piece, and then I'll stop for a second, is that cycle of violence. So we see that it's escalation over time, and it's also a cycle. So on that cycle, there's 3 stages that we put. So one is, like, the tension building phase. It's the walking on eggshells. It's the victim, the survivor, is sensing there's, like, a build, and I'm trying to kind of walk through and placate the abuser so, like, I can try to push off the violence as long as possible. And then it goes to the violent episode, and it could be verbal, physical, sexual, or emotional. Marcus, we're filming. I'm sure yelling into the microphone is not even any more helpful than that. But cycle of violence, violent episode happens, which is immediately followed by the honeymoon phase. And so the honeymoon phase is, like, what makes it so hard too. So maybe abuser says, I'm sorry. Maybe they don't ever say I'm sorry, but it's over. Maybe they buy gifts. Baby, I'm never going to do it again. Let's go to Hawaii. Let's do this. Let's go out to dinner. I'm going to go get you a blizzard, whatever you want. So it's followed by that. I'll change. I'll go to therapy. I'll do X, Y, and Z. I'll fix myself. Or maybe it's more of a gaslighting thing where there's a huge fight that happened Saturday night. Sunday morning, she barely slept all night. She gets up and he's acting totally normal. And she's like, and so she's thinking, am I being crazy? Did I overreact to this? But the tension is over. It's gone. So something is done, but she's thinking, like, what? Was I being oversensitive? What, did something happen? So it could be that I'm sorry. It could be gifts. It could be that gaslighting. That, like, the tension is gone, but it's that, and then that's followed by the tension building. So it goes in a cycle. It's a circle, and I draw this out for clients, like, in session. We do a lot of this, and a lot of them are like, yep. Most all of them say, yeah, that's what it is. It's a cycle here. So it's not just a line or an escalation. It's a escalation and this cycle here, which makes it so complicated because we want to think the best of each other, and we want to be compassionate and loving. And this person I've invested so much of time and effort to, I want to hope that they're going to change. And I love them because they're not always an ass. A jerk.
No, you're fine.
Okay. They're not always a horrible person. And so there's that glimmer in there, and we hold on to that. I can think of non-abusive relationships, but, like, like an unhealthy, like even friendships where I latched on to this key of like, oh, you know, she was so nice to me here, or he was so good. Like I can hold on to this friendship. Like in those little kernels, we hold on to those so tightly. And then we're like, you know, this actually isn't like a good relationship for me.
Yeah.
Either like an unhealthy friendship or like a relationship too in that.
I need to pee.
Oh, okay.